Imagine lying in your bed, but you're not alone. For centuries, kings and queens slept surrounded by guards, servants, and even strangers, all watching their every move. Tonight, we uncover the shocking lack of privacy in royal sleepovers, where even the most intimate moments were public spectacles. How did they cope with the constant scrutiny? And what does this tell us about power and vulnerability? If you enjoy these journeys into the past, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps our small community of quiet history lovers grow more than you know. I'm always curious where you all are listening from, so feel free to drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It's fascinating to see our global community connecting through these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You might think a king's bedroom was his castle, but the truth is the opposite. These chambers were more like theatre stages than private retreats. At Versailles, Louis XIV's bedroom sat at the exact centre of the palace, with doors that led directly to public halls. He didn't just sleep there, he held audiences from bed. Courtiers crowded in to watch the king wake up, dress, and even pray. The bed itself was raised on a platform, so everyone could see him. This wasn't just about showing off, the layout sent a message. Royal life was never truly private. In England, Henry VIII's bedchamber had an antechamber, a privy chamber, and an outer chamber, each filled with people who had rights to be there. Gentlemen of the bedchamber stood guard, but they also gossiped. Maids smoothed sheets while diplomats lingered nearby, hoping for a word. The bed was often the most expensive piece in the palace, draped in velvet and gold thread. Yet it wasn't a place for rest. It was a prop. Even nighttime brought no escape. Servants slept on pallets near the royal bed, supposedly to tend to the monarch's needs. But their real job was surveillance. They reported every cough, every mumbled word. In Spain, Philip II's bedroom had a hidden door behind the bed so spies could listen in. You wouldn't dare roll over without someone noting it. Some tried to carve out moments alone. Elizabeth I ordered her ladies to wait outside while she slept, but they stood right by the door, eavesdropping. When she took too long to answer a knock, they'd burst in, fearing she'd been assassinated. Privacy wasn't just rare, it was suspected. A king who wanted solitude might be plotting treason. And forget about modern comforts. Royal beds were often short because they slept propped upright. It was thought lying flat could kill you. Heavy curtains kept drafts out and witnesses in. The air would have been thick with perfume masking the smell of unwashed bodies. Imagine trying to sleep in a room where people whispered, footsteps creaked, and guards paced all night. The strangest part? This wasn't considered strange. Royals grew up with it. From childhood, they were watched while bathing, dressing, even using the chamber pot. The bed was just another place where power played out. If you couldn't eat, sleep, or breathe without an audience, you learned to perform. This wasn't just about control, it was about survival. A monarch alone was vulnerable to rumors or coup attempts. The crowd in the bedroom proved the king was alive, healthy, and in charge. No privacy meant no secrets. No secrets meant no surprises. Some kings pushed back. Charles II of England famously sneaked out to his mistress's houses, where he could finally relax. But even then, his guards followed, standing outside the door. The bedroom was never really his. It belonged to the crown. Today we treat bedrooms as sanctuaries, but for centuries they were the opposite, the most public room in the house. Next time you complain about a noisy neighbor, remember, at least they're not watching you sleep. Now about those neighbors. One group had front row seats to everything, including the king's bathroom habits. But we'll get to the groom of the stool in a moment. First, let me know in the comments. Could you handle sleeping with an audience? And don't forget to like if you're enjoying this deep dive into royal discomfort. The algorithm loves when you do that. Back to Louis XIV at Versailles. His morning routine was a meticulously choreographed spectacle called the lever. Dozens of nobles competed for the honor of handing him his shirt. It wasn't servitude, it was power. The closer you stood to the bed, the higher your status. Missing a lever could mean losing your position at court. The bed itself was almost sacred. When the king wasn't in it, visitors would bow as they passed. At night, a priest blessed the room, but the blessing didn't keep the crowds away. If anything, it drew more eyes. This wasn't unique to Europe. In Siam, the king's bedroom door had to be kept slightly ajar so guards could check his breathing. In Mughal India, emperors slept in open pavilions with only a thin curtain for privacy. The message was the same everywhere. A ruler's body was public property. Even childbirth happened in public. When Marie Antoinette went into labor, a crowd of courtiers packed the room to witness the royal baby's arrival. She fainted from the heat and noise. No one left. Queens didn't get to recover in peace either. Visitors would file past the bed to inspect the newborn and mother. The few who demanded privacy paid for it. Empress Elizabeth of Austria insisted on locking her bedroom door. Her staff panicked, assuming she'd been murdered. Tsar Alexander I of Russia took baths alone until his nobles drilled peepholes in the wall. Why endure this? Because secrecy bred suspicion. A king who shut himself away might be sick, weak, or dead. In a time before photos or newspapers, people needed to see their ruler to believe he ruled. The bedroom wasn't a retreat, it was proof of life and proof of power. Every morning, the ritual repeated. The king awoke, the court assembled, the performance began. The bed was his throne, the sheets his robes. You weren't just watching him wake up. You were watching the state in action. Except for one awkward detail, even kings have bodily functions. And yes, someone had to deal with those too. But that's a job so bizarre, it deserves its own section. For now, just picture it. You're the most powerful person in the kingdom, but you can't even sneeze without someone making a note of it. Your bed is a monument, your blankets are a costume, and your dreams are the only thing that's truly yours, assuming you can sleep at all. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a roommate this intrusive. And stay tuned. Next up, we're talking about the one job at court no one wanted, until they realized it came with unlimited access to the king. Speaking of access, the morning routine was just the beginning. After the lever came the dressing ceremony, where queens endured hours of being laced, pinned, and draped in front of an audience. But we'll get to that torture later. First, let's talk about the man who saw everything. The groom of the stool didn't just assist the king, he held the most trusted position in the palace. Because when nature called, even monarchs needed help. But why was wiping a king's backside considered an honor? That's where things get interesting. Think about the worst job at a royal court. Cleaning the stables? Emptying chamber pots? No, the most awkward role was also the most powerful. Meet the groom of the stool, the person who handled the king's toilet needs. This wasn't just some lowly servant, it was a position nobles fought over. Because where others saw a dirty job, the ambitious saw opportunity. The title sounds vague, groom of the stool, but there was nothing vague about the work. The stool was the royal toilet, usually a velvet-covered box with a hole in it. The groom's job, assist the king with his business. That meant handing him linen, providing water, and yes, cleaning up afterward. Disgusting to us. But in Tudor England, this was a top job. Henry VIII had 4 grooms at once, all high-born men. Here's why it mattered. The king was never alone, not even here. But while others waited outside the privy chamber, the groom went in. That meant private conversations, jokes, secrets. The groom heard everything while the king was, well, occupied. No one else got that kind of access. If you wanted the king's ear, befriending his groom was the smart move. It wasn't just gossip either. The groom monitored the king's health by examining his waist. Too loose might be illness. Wrong color could mean poisoning. This was 16th century medicine. Doctors relied on these reports. The groom wasn't just a helper. He was an early warning system. The perks were real. Grooms got the king's old clothes, including fur-lined gowns worth a fortune. They had rooms near his chambers. Most importantly, they controlled access. If a duke wanted a word with the king, the groom decided if and when it happened. That's power. Some grooms became legends. Sir Henry Norris served Henry VIII for over 20 years, becoming one of his closest friends. Of course, that didn't save him when he fell out of favor. Henry had him executed. But for decades, Norris had influence most ministers envied. The job wasn't just about bodily functions. The groom organized the king's bathing rituals, which could involve dozens of servants hauling hot water. He managed the linen, fine imported fabrics, not rough rags. Everything touching the king's skin had to be flawless. One stain on the wrong sheet, and heads could roll. Women weren't allowed this role. Queens had ladies for intimate tasks, but nothing matched the groom's political access. A queen's attendants changed her clothes and helped her bathe, but they rarely gained real power. The groom, he could make or break careers. The strange part, kings seemed to enjoy the company. Elizabeth I's father, Henry VIII, played cards with his grooms while on the toilet. James I gossiped with them about court scandals. It was a weird mix of formality and familiarity, like a boss chatting with an employee, except the boss was half-dressed. Of course, it wasn't all pleasant. The groom had to be discreet. If the king had digestive issues, you didn't mention it. If he took too long, you didn't hurry him. And heaven help you if you laughed at the wrong moment. One slip, and you'd be swapping velvet stools for a dungeon. The position lasted for centuries. Even as toilets improved, the title stayed. By the 1700s, the job was mostly symbolic. No actual wiping required, but it kept its prestige. The last official groom of the stool served Queen Victoria, though by then the duties were purely ceremonial. Modern historians debate why kings allowed this invasion of privacy. Some say it was about control, a way to remind nobles no moment was truly theirs. Others think it was practical. Without modern plumbing, even a king needed help staying clean. Either way, the groom's access was unmatched. Ambassadors bribed him for information. Ministers begged him to pass along requests. When the king was in a bad mood, the groom knew why. In a world where information was power, that made him indispensable. Sometimes the system backfired. When Henry VIII grew paranoid, he accused his grooms of spying. Some were banished, a few were executed. Get too close to the king and you risked his temper. Still, men lined up for the job. The bathroom wasn't the only weird place courtiers gathered. Royal marriages required witnesses, not just for the ceremony, but for the consummation, because nothing said romance like a crowd of strangers watching you undress. But we'll get to that in a minute. Back to the grooms. Their influence faded when kings moved toward more private lifestyles. Louis XIV of France still held court in his bedroom, but even he drew the line at bathroom audiences. By the 1800s, royals wanted actual walls between them and their servants. The groom's legacy lives on in unexpected ways. Today's personal assistants might not handle toilet duty, but they still manage schedules, guard secrets, and filter access. The job titles changed, but the idea didn't. Power still favors those who see the boss at their most vulnerable. Ever had a job where you knew too much about your employer? Let me know in the comments. And imagine this. What if your promotion depended on how well you handled your boss's bathroom breaks? Puts your work issues in perspective, doesn't it? Next time you complain about awkward office small talk, remember the groom of the stool. He didn't just make conversation, he made history while holding a king's linen. Now let's talk about something even more invasive than bathroom duty. At least the groom got something out of it. Royal newlyweds. They got an audience, a literal one. Because nothing says happily ever after, like proving your marriage is consummated before witnesses. But that's for the next section. Before we get to that, consider this. The most trusted person in the king's life was the one who saw him at his weakest. That says something about power. You don't really know someone until you've seen them without their crown. Speaking of crowns, queens had their own rituals. Morning dressing ceremonies turned everyday tasks into performances, with ladies jostling for the honor of handing over a hairpin. But that's another level of scrutiny we'll cover later. For now, just picture it. You're the most powerful ruler in the land, but you can't even use the bathroom without someone handing you a cloth. Privacy wasn't just rare, it was dangerous. Because in royal courts, the closer you were to the body, the closer you were to the throne. That's why the groom of the stool wasn't a joke. He was the ultimate insider. And in a world where information meant survival, that made him invaluable. Still, some kings pushed back. Charles II of England snuck out to mistresses' houses, not just for fun, but for privacy. Even then, his grooms followed, waiting outside the bedroom door, because no matter where the king went, the system went with him. Now, let's talk about what happened when the king wasn't alone in bed. Royal weddings weren't complete until the marriage was consummated, and everyone knew it. But we'll get to that disturbing tradition next. Meanwhile, drop a comment if you've ever had a job that required too much personal involvement. And remember to like the video if you're enjoying this deep dive into royal oversharing. The groom of the stool's real power wasn't in what he did. It was in what he saw. Because in royal courts, knowledge was currency. And nothing gave you more leverage than knowing the king's habits better than he did. Up next, the most awkward wedding night in history. Witnesses, sheets, and a very public proof of love. Stay tuned. Before we go there, here's a question. Could you perform under pressure like that? Most of us get nervous with one person in the room. Royals did it with dozens. And not just anyone. Diplomats, relatives, rivals. Talk about stage fright. That's the thing about royal life. Every moment was public, even the ones that shouldn't be. The bedroom, the bathroom, the marriage bed. Nowhere was off limits. Because for kings and queens, privacy wasn't a right, it was a risk. The groom of the stool understood that better than anyone. He didn't just serve the king. He saw the man behind the crown. And in a world built on illusions, that made him dangerous. Now let's talk about what happened when the lights went out. And the crowd stayed. Because royal newlyweds didn't get a honeymoon. They got an audience. But that's a story for the next section. Before we move on, think about this. Today we obsess over celebrity privacy. Paparazzi, leaked photos, social media. Imagine your wedding night. Now imagine it with a dozen strangers watching. For royal couples, this wasn't just a nightmare, It was protocol. Consummating a marriage wasn't a private act. It was a public performance, complete with witnesses, ceremonial bedding, and even inspections afterwards. This wasn't about romance. It was about politics. Take Mary, Queen of Scots. At 15, she married Francis, the Dauphin of France. Their bedding ceremony was lavish. Priests blessed the bed while nobles crowded into the chamber. The couple was undressed, by attendants of course, and put to bed together. Then the doors were closed, but not all the way. Witnesses lingered outside, listening for proof the marriage was consummated. The next morning, the sheets would be checked for blood. This wasn't unique to Mary. Across Europe, royal weddings followed the same script. The couple was put to bed in front of the court. Sometimes, witnesses stayed in the room, behind a curtain or screen, but still present. In Spain, the groom's relatives might stand at the foot of the bed. In England, bishops waited outside the door. Why? Because royal marriages were contracts. Lands, titles, alliances, everything depended on heirs. And heirs had to be legitimate. Witnesses ensured no one could later claim the marriage wasn't real. For the couples, this was torture. Imagine trying to perform with your in-laws listening outside. Some kings refused. Henry VIII allegedly sent witnesses away during his wedding night with Anne Boleyn, but most had no choice. Their privacy was never theirs to begin with. The bedding ceremony itself was ritualized. The bride was undressed by her ladies, the groom by his gentlemen. They were given ceremonial nightshirts, often specially made for the occasion. Then they were led to bed together while guests drank and joked. In some courts, the couple was given spiced wine to help them relax. The morning after, the real scrutiny began. Servants inspected the sheets for blood, proof of the bride's virginity. In some cases, the sheets were displayed to the court. In others, witnesses signed sworn statements confirming the marriage had been consummated. This wasn't just awkward, it was dangerous. A bride who failed to bleed could be accused of impurity. A groom who couldn't perform risked humiliation. In 1495, the Duke of Orléans was pressured into consummating his marriage despite being gravely ill. He died shortly after. Politics came first, even over health. Some couples found ways around it. Anne of Austria, married to Louis III of France, reportedly faked her wedding night. The king had little interest in women, so his advisors staged the whole thing. Witnesses were positioned outside the door, making enough noise to cover the lack of activity inside. The next morning, the sheets were discreetly stained. Everyone pretended not to notice, others weren't so lucky. When Catherine of Aragon married Prince Arthur Tudor, the bedding ceremony was lavish. Afterwards, Arthur allegedly boasted he'd been in the midst of Spain. A crude joke about consummation. When he died months later, that boast haunted Catherine. Years after, during her divorce battle with Henry VIII, witnesses were called to testify about that night. The stakes were high. A disputed consummation could undo alliances. When Maria Theresa married Louis XIV, the French ambassador insisted on witnessing the bedding. The Spanish refused. It was beneath their dignity. The compromise? A partial curtain through which the ambassador could verify the marriage was consummated without seeing too much. Even consummation wasn't always enough. Some kingdoms required multiple witnesses over several nights. In Portugal, the royal couple had to prove they could conceive, meaning the inspections didn't stop after the first night. For brides, the pressure was unbearable. Many were teenagers, married off to strangers. They had no say in the ceremony, no way to opt out, and if anything went wrong, they were blamed. When Marguerite of Burgundy's marriage to Louis VI was annulled, it was her reputation that suffered, not his. Kings didn't escape scrutiny either. A groom who hesitated could be seen as weak. When Philip II of Spain married Mary the Fawn of England, the court watched closely. The marriage had to produce an heir. Protestant Europe depended on it. Every whisper about their first night spread like wildfire. The worst part? This wasn't a one-time event. Queens had to endure routine checks throughout their marriages. During Catherine de' Medici's struggle to conceive, court physicians examined her regularly. Her husband's mistresses mocked her in public. Privacy wasn't just absent, it was unthinkable. By the 1700s, the practice started fading. Enlightenment ideals emphasized personal privacy, but old habits died hard. When Marie Antoinette married Louis XVI, the bedding ceremony still happened. Witnesses reported the king's lack of enthusiasm. For years, the French court whispered about why the marriage went unconsummated. Eventually, Joseph II of Austria had to intervene, giving his brother-in-law pointed advice. The bedding ceremony wasn't just about proof, it was a power play. By making intimacy public, courts reminded royals their bodies weren't their own. Every heir, every alliance depended on performance. Literally, today we'd call this humiliation. Back then, it was routine. Royals grew up knowing their weddings would be public property. Some accepted it, others rebelled, but none escaped it entirely. The strangest part? Some witnesses took notes, detailed ones. In Vatican archives, you can find accounts of royal consummations. Who was nervous, who hesitated, who seemed eager. These weren't secret diaries. They were official records. And it wasn't just Europeans. In Siam, royal couples were watched by elderly ladies who coached them through the act. In Mughal India, the bride's female relatives stayed in the room. Every culture had its own version, but the principle was the same. Procreation was political. Few queens resisted as boldly as Christina of Sweden. She refused to marry entirely, preferring affairs with women. When pressured, she abdicated. Better to lose a crown than endure a public wedding night. Most couldn't afford that choice. For them, the ceremony was just the start. Once married, queens faced constant scrutiny over pregnancies, cycles, and fertility. Their bodies were state business. Eleanor of Aquitaine famously said, "They measure my waist like a broodmare's." She wasn't wrong. Men weren't exempt. Kings who showed, let's say, diminished interest in their wives faced rumours of witchcraft or impotence. When Henry VIII turned from Catherine of Aragon, he claimed their marriage was cursed. Because of course, it couldn't just be him. By the Victorian era, the public consummation had vanished. But the mindset lingered. Queens still needed male heirs. Kings still needed proof their children were legitimate. The methods changed. The pressure didn't. Now imagine explaining this to a modern couple. "Honey, about our wedding night. My parents will be listening at the door." It sounds like a joke, but for centuries this was normal. So next time you cringe at an awkward wedding toast, remember, at least no one's inspecting your sheets afterward. Royalty didn't have that luxury. Their love lives were public record. Speaking of public performances, queens faced another daily humiliation, the morning dressing ritual. But that's another story. Before we get there, tell me in the comments, could you handle a wedding night like that? And if you think this is wild, wait until you hear about the doctor who checked royal bed sheets every morning. Because here's the thing, royal marriages weren't about love. They were about legitimacy, and legitimacy required proof. No matter how personal the cost, the bedding ceremony wasn't the end of scrutiny. After the wedding came the real test, pregnancy. And that meant more inspections, more rumours, more pressure. But we'll get to that later. For now, consider this. We complain about social media exposing our lives, but at least we choose what to share. Royals had no choice. Their most private moments were crowdfunded. Up next, the bizarre morning ritual where queens dressed like actors on a stage, because even getting dressed wasn't a private affair. Stay tuned. But before we go there, here's a question. What's the strangest wedding tradition you've heard of? Let me know below. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into royal oversharing, take a moment to like the video. The irony? Today, we fight to keep weddings intimate. Royals fought to make theirs public, because in their world, privacy wasn't romantic. It was suspicious. Now let's talk about what happened after the wedding night. Because for queens, the performance never ended. Not even while getting dressed. But that's for the next section. Until then, remember, your awkward family weddings could always be worse. At least no one's taking notes. For queens, mornings weren't about quiet coffee moments or scrolling through phones. Waking up meant stepping onto a stage. From the moment eyes opened, every movement became public spectacle. The morning dressing ritual wasn't mere routine. It was political theatre where fabrics became weapons and hairpins turned into bargaining chips. The ceremony began with attendance. Dozens of women already waited outside the royal bedchamber before dawn. Only certain ranks could enter first. The most privileged handed the queen her shift while lesser ladies stood further back. Your position in line reflected your influence at court. Come late and you risked losing status. Arrive too early and you appeared desperate. These calculations happened daily before breakfast. Marie Antoinette's morning toilette lasted 2 hours minimum. First came the chemise, handed by the highest ranking lady. Then stockings, fastened by the next in line. Each garment required specific handling. The woman who tied the corset strings held enviable power. A slight pull too tight could make the queen cough. Too loose, and the silhouette would fail. Either mistake meant demotion. Versailles records show ladies practicing knots for hours to avoid errors. Nothing was casual. When Elizabeth addressed, her ladies counted aloud as they pinned each jewel. Too many gems could signal excess. Too few might suggest financial trouble. Her wardrobe master kept detailed logs tracking brooches by diplomatic occasion. A ruby worn for Spanish envoys sent different signals than sapphires for French visitors. Queens didn't choose outfits. They navigated minefields. The hierarchy extended to scent. Only certain ladies applied perfume. Others could hold the vial but not touch skin. At the Stuart court, spilling a drop meant immediate dismissal. Catherine de' Medici's ladies competed to source new fragrances from Italy. Whoever presented the favourite scent gained weeks of favour. Perfume politics grew so intense that some mixed poisons into competitors' bottles. Several ladies at the French court died mysterious deaths after winning the perfume wars. Hairstyling was worse. Anne Boleyn's ladies needed steady hands while crafting her signature French hood. One misplaced pin could topple the structure, which happened when a nervous attendant fumbled before imperial ambassadors. Henry VIII reportedly laughed while Anne seethed. The attendant vanished from court records afterward. Mary Queen of Scots had 18 hair rituals alone, each curl positioned to signal either marital availability or pious restraint depending on audience. The dressing ceremony doubled as court session. Ambassadors arrived during stocking fastening to discuss treaties. Treasury ministers bargained while sleeves were buttoned. This wasn't multitasking, it was strategy. Queen's new petitioners were distracted by spectacle. Elizabeth I often secured better terms while admirers stared at her bejeweled hands rather than contractual details. Some garments carried extraordinary weight. Coronation robes stayed under armed guard when not worn. When a Tudor courtier tried stealing cloth of gold trimmings from Catherine of Aragon's dressing chamber, Henry VIII had his right hand severed. The message, royal fabric equaled royal power. Even discarded garments held value. Anne of Brittany's old smocks were cut into relics for favoured subjects. Undergarments sparked scandals. When Louis XIV's sister-in-law wore Indies cotton instead of regulation linen, the court accused her of foreign sympathies. Cotton violated sumptuary laws. Only nobility could wear certain fabrics. Her choice implied criticism of French trade policies. The resulting uproar forced public apology. Something as simple as a petticoat could topple careers. The rituals drained participants. Maria Theresa of Spain frequently fainted during prolonged ceremonies. Her attendants developed code words to pause proceedings without losing face. Requesting Spanish air meant urgent breaks. Other queens suffered silently. Empress Elizabeth of Austria banned talking during her 3-hour hair braiding sessions. Violators faced immediate exile from her chambers. Men weren't exempt. Kings endured similar spectacles. Henry VIII's garter tying required 6 witnesses to verify proper technique. Each stitch in his doublet represented political loyalty. Seamstresses who missed symbolic embroidery faced interrogation. One unfortunate tailor was hanged for omitting Welsh leeks from a ceremonial jacket. Mourning dress reflected current events. During plague outbreaks, queens wore amber beads as protective talismans. War periods saw military motifs sewn into shifts. When Philip II prepared to invade England, his wife appeared with embroidered storm clouds on her sleeves. Courtiers read these details like newspapers. Resistance carried risks. When Christina of Sweden skipped dressing ceremonies, the council declared her unfit to rule. Her abdication notes cite irregular toilet habits among grievances. Pressured to conform, she finally chose exile over stockings. Most couldn't escape. Catherine the Great humorously described her ladies as human hangers, yet she still endured daily rituals to maintain authority. Children entered the system early. Future Queen Mary. I joined her mother's dressing at age 3, her tiny hands practicing jewel handling under supervision. Royal toddlers learned that dropping a brooch meant standing in corners. By adolescence, they understood fabric choices could provoke wars. One careless feather in a teenage princess's headdress nearly ignited conflict between France and Navarre. The theatre extended beyond clothes. Witnesses documented each queen's wash basin rituals. Skipping morning ablutions suggested moral decay. Elizabeth I's teeth-cleaning ceremony required 12 spectators. Documents specify that watching her scrub molars proved she had nothing to hide. Strange logic, but consistent with court paranoia. Nothing was discarded. Napkins used during the Queen's morning meal became status objects, granted to favourites as trophies. The Duke of Buckingham reportedly paid $500 for one of Anne Boleyn's discarded handkerchiefs. When Charles I's wife blew her nose before bishops, 3 clerics lunged for the used linen. Such scrambles happened daily. By the ceremony's end, queens were armoured for battle. Every ribbon placement calculated, each accessory loaded with meaning. What modern eyes see as fashion was actually high-stakes diplomacy. A wrinkled cuff could imply disorderly rule. Missing buttons suggested financial trouble. The performative aspects never ceased. Even in private chambers, queens knew observers lurked behind tapestries. Maria Luisa of Spain famously caught a maid taking notes on her unguarded posture. Information later used against her in succession debates. Privacy equated to vulnerability. Constant performance meant control. Modern royalty abandoned most rituals, but echoes remain. Queen Elizabeth II's dresses still follow protocols from Victoria's era. Certain jewels reserved for specific events, color choices signaling subtle messages. The game continues, just with less audience participation. Before judging these customs, consider equivalent pressures today. Celebrities face similar scrutiny over red carpet choices. Politicians get analyzed for tie colors. The medium changed, the scrutiny didn't. At least today's stars can dress in private before facing cameras. Queens had cameras, in human form, from the second they woke. The morning ritual wasn't about vanity, it was about survival. In a world where each glove could be interpreted 6 ways, control over appearance meant control over narrative. Queens understood what modern influencers learn painfully. When your body is public property, every detail becomes a calculated performance. Speaking of performances, some royals took extreme measures to escape the watchful eyes. Secret passages, hidden rooms, even disguises. Next time you'll hear about kings who slept in servants' quarters, not for comfort, but to dodge their own courts. Because when everyone watches your every move, sometimes you need to vanish, if just for one night. Still, imagine getting through airport security with this level of scrutiny. Ma'am, we need to inspect each hairpin separately. Let me know in the comments. Could you handle this morning routine every single day? And don't forget, 1 like equals 1 less petticoat layer for these poor queens. Fashion wasn't the only battlefield. Royal doctors conducted bizarre morning inspections of their own, checking bedsheets like detectives at a crime scene. But we'll explore why physicians needed to examine royal bodily functions in the next section. Because here's the truth. In royal life, nothing stopped being political. Not sleeping, not marrying, not dressing, and certainly not getting sick. When a king caught cold, it wasn't just his nose running, it was the state's business. But that's a diagnosis we'll examine later. For now, picture this. You've survived the morning ordeal. Now come 12 hours of audiences, dinners, and ceremonies where every gesture will be analysed. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again, with the same audience, and the same stakes. The only difference? Maybe you'll wear the emerald brooch instead of the pearl one. Because in royal courts, changing accessories constituted rebellion. The question isn't why these rituals existed. It's how anyone tolerated them daily. The answer, most didn't have a choice. Performance wasn't part of the job, it was the job. The crown came with expectations, and dressing rooms served as throne rooms by another name. Some queens found small revolts. Marie Antoinette famously wore muslin chemises, shocking simplicity that undermined decades of protocol. Her punishment, the court deemed her unsuitable long before the revolutionaries did. Even fabrics could be treasonous when you lived your life on display. If this sounds exhausting, consider the staff. Maids memorized hundreds of rules. Which lace for which feast day, which sleeve length for which season. Make one error and you weren't just fired. You disgraced your family. Archives show dressing manuals thicker than tax codes. Now imagine explaining this at a modern job interview. Skills. Oh, I can identify 12 types of Venetian lace blindfolded and know 17 ways to fold a royal handkerchief. Oddly specific, but vital expertise in 16th century courts. What fascinates historians isn't the excess, it's the precision. For kings, bedtime wasn't about rest, it was about survival. The most powerful men in Europe often slept in servants' quarters rather than their own beds. Not for comfort, but because a humble pallet in the kitchens might be safer than a canopied masterpiece in the state bedroom. This wasn't paranoia. History showed what happened when monarchs let their guard down after dark. Take Henry IV of France. He survived over 20 assassination attempts before finally being stabbed to death in his carriage. But the more telling incident happened earlier, when his bedchamber became the scene of a failed attack. The would-be killer, a fanatical student, hid in the royal privy for hours waiting for Henry to retire. He misjudged where the king would sleep that night. Something Henry did deliberately, changing locations without pattern. Royal bedrooms had multiple escape routes for this reason. At Holyrood Palace, a secret staircase behind Mary Queen of Scots' bed led directly to the docks. Guards provided limited protection. They could be bribed, distracted, or simply overwhelmed. When Edward II was deposed, his sentries conveniently missed the invaders scaling the castle walls at night. Richard II's guards stepped aside when Henry Bolingbroke came to seize the throne. The lesson? Loyalty faded in darkness. Some kings took extreme precautions. Louis XV of France kept a rotating schedule of 12 identical bedrooms, each with its own guard detail. Only 2 people knew which he'd use each night, and they were forbidden from speaking to each other. Even then, he slept in a reinforced cabinet bed with iron shutters, more prison cell than royal suite. Visitors noted the stifling heat and lack of windows. Comfort mattered less than control. The threat wasn't abstract. Medieval coronation records list specific oath clauses about protecting the king's sleep. An Anglo-Saxon document from 973 AD requires thanes to guard the royal bedchamber in shifts, weapons drawn. Breaking this duty warranted execution, a law invoked when Edmund Ironside's guards failed to stop his midnight assassination in 1016. Architecture reflected the fear. Windsor Castle's Edward III Tower has bedchambers accessible only by narrow spiral staircases, easily defensible choke points. At Dover, Henry II installed alarm bells that could be rung from the royal bed itself. Most telling are the coffer ceilings in Scottish palaces, hidden compartments above beds where archers could station themselves unseen. Food posed another risk. Byzantine emperors employed primitive food testers, not just tasters who sampled dishes, but servants who slept in the royal bed first to detect poisoned linens. Venetian doges had their sheets boiled in vinegar weekly to neutralize toxins. The concern wasn't unfounded. Rumors swirled that Henry VIII's third wife, Jane Seymour, died from imbibed poison, though modern historians suspect childbirth complications. Even children weren't exempt. The young Edward VI journals mention armed nurses watching him sleep after his father's death. His tutors doubled as bodyguards, with one allegedly intercepting a would-be stabber disguised as a laundress. The attacker? A woman whose family lost lands during the Reformation. Proof that policy decisions could literally come back to haunt royal sleep. Nighttime security created weird paradoxes. James I of England hated locking doors but feared assassins. His solution? Propping them slightly open with precisely measured gaps, enough to show good faith, but too narrow for intruders. He also demanded all candles remain lit, resulting in chronic sleep deprivation from the constant glow. Court physicians eventually prescribed opium to counteract the insomnia caused by his own precautions. Violence didn't always come from outsiders. The infamous 1387 murder of Charles III of Navarre occurred when his own brother crept into the bedroom, disguised as a servant. The killer exploited a key vulnerability. Royal attendants were exempt from certain searches. After this, French kings instituted the naked entry rule. Anyone approaching the royal bed after dark had to strip to their undershirt first. No weapons, no concealed tools, just skin and presumed loyalty. Bedchambers doubled as emergency bunkers. When rebels stormed the Louvre in 1358, John II retreated not to the throne room, but to his fortified bedroom. The reinforced door held long enough for rescue, barely. Similar scenes played out during the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, when Richard II barricaded himself in the Tower's bedchamber while London burned. These spaces weren't designed for comfort. They were last-ditch strongholds. Some threats were subtler than blades or poison. Royal bedrooms often contained hidden listening posts where spies could monitor conversations. Henry V's will specifically forbid reconstructing certain bedchamber walls at Westminster, likely because their acoustics had been engineered to carry whispers to adjacent rooms. Privacy wasn't just rare, it was structurally impossible in some palaces. Wives became unintended threats. Numerous queens were accused of plotting against their husbands after bedtime whispers were overheard. Anne Boleyn's alleged treasonous comments about Henry VIII's inadequacies supposedly occurred during pillow talk, with her ladies listening behind the bed curtains. Whether true or fabricated, the lesson was clear. Even matrimonial intimacy could be weaponized. The Protestant Reformation intensified fears. Catholic plotters targeted Elizabeth the Firm so persistently that she changed bedrooms nightly at Whitehall Palace. Her guards developed passwords updated at sundown. Get it wrong before dawn, and you'd be shot on sight. Walsingham's spies occasionally tested security by attempting to breach the chambers themselves. One such test in 1582 nearly got the agent killed when an overzealous sentry ignored the drill premise. Medicine collided with security. Royal physicians checking pulses at night had their hands searched first. When Charles II suffered a stroke, his doctors weren't allowed to bleed him until guards inventoried every lancet and bowl. Apothecaries mixing sleeping draughts worked under armed supervision. Ironically, attempts to safeguard health often delayed treatment, as with George III's Porphyria attacks, where security protocols slowed crucial interventions. Even beds themselves could be traps. After discovering hollow bedposts concealing knives in a guest chamber, James II ordered all royal furniture hollows filled with lead. Similar paranoia inspired Louis XIV's famed Bed of Justice, not just a ceremonial throne, but an actual sleeping surface packed with hidden compartments for documents and emergency weapons. Visitors admiring its gilded carvings missed the more practical details. The deadliest hours weren't midnight, but just before dawn. Guards grew fatigued, candles burned low, and the body's natural sleep cycle made responses sluggish. Historical records show over 60% of successful royal assassinations occurred between 3 to 5 a.m. Richard V's crossbow wound at Limoges. Dawn Henry III's stabbing by a monk, pre-dawn prayers. These patterns weren't lost on security-conscious monarchs. Some turned vulnerability into spectacle. When Charles V hosted Suleiman the Magnificent's envoys, he deliberately received them while dressing, surrounded by armed guards. This wasn't just hubris, it showed off his security apparatus. The message: attempt something, and 20 blades would descend before you blinked. Theatrical displays could deter where secrecy failed. Children inherited the paranoia. Future Charles I's nursery had checkpoints, with nurses passing him through little fortified doors between rooms. His toys included miniature armor to accustom his body to restriction. The psychological toll became evident later. As king, he developed pathological fears about bedchamber intruders, boarding up windows no one could reach. Servants occupied precarious positions. Those who defended royals gained riches, one of Elizabeth. I's bedchamber women received lands worth 300 ton yearly after thwarting a knife attack. But guards who failed faced horrifying punishments. Edward II's watchmen were flayed alive after his murder. Their skin was reportedly nailed to the bedchamber door as a warning. Modern royalty inherited scaled-down versions. Queen Victoria slept with a pistol under her pillow after the 1840 assassination attempt. Security protocols today still reflect medieval logic, rotating schedules, decoy routes, and meticulous access logs. The difference: today's royals don't expect servants to sleep on their bedroom floors. The obsession left architectural legacies. Versailles' Hall of Mirrors wasn't just ornamental. Its reflective surfaces allowed guards to monitor multiple angles simultaneously. Hampton Court's famous whispering gallery served a practical purpose, eavesdropping on those lingering near the royal bed. Even decorative moats originated as defensive measures for nighttime protection. In the end, some kings abandoned pretense altogether. Frederick the Great built a separate, Spartan sleeping chamber away from his palace's grandeur. No gilt, no tapestries, just a military cot in a locked stone room. His reasoning? A king who fears sleep is no king at all, but a man who ignores fear is already dead. Balance proved impossible. For every monarch who tightened security, another loosened it, with mixed results. Henry VIII initially dismissed concerns until a would-be assassin scaled the palace walls, using bed linens stolen by a bribed laundress. After that, even his famous beds got metal-reinforced frames. The lesson: underestimate nighttime threats, and you might not wait to regret it. Today we debate government surveillance versus privacy. Royals never had that luxury. For them, being watched wasn't political, it was existential. That canopy bed wasn't a sanctuary. It was the ultimate vulnerability, and sometimes the last thing they ever saw. Yet amidst all this, one group had unrestricted access to sleeping monarchs, ostensibly for health reasons. Royal physicians could enter at any hour, examine anything, and ask the most invasive questions, all in the name of medicine. But their morning routine involved something even stranger than midnight checkups. They inspected bedsheets like detectives at a crime scene. But that's a diagnosis for the next section. Before we examine the physician's strange duties, let me know, could you sleep knowing enemies might strike any moment? Drop a comment below. And if you think your job's stressful, imagine getting paid to stare at royal bedsheets for clues. Now that's workplace hazard. The ultimate irony? While kings feared sleep, they also feared not sleeping. Insomnia meant vulnerability to sickness, a dire threat when medicine was primitive. So, night watch captains weren't just guarding against blades and poison. They timed their sovereign's breaths, noting every cough or restless turn. Being royal meant your very dreams were someone else's business. Speaking of business, some kings conducted affairs under the guise of bedtime checks. The royal physician didn't just take your pulse and call it a day. His morning started with something much more invasive, inspecting the monarch's bedsheets like a detective at a crime scene. This wasn't about housekeeping. Those stains and smells were his medical charts long before hospitals existed. Every sweat mark told a story. Every discoloration could signal danger. Kings and queens woke to physicians sniffing their linens, fingers tracing damp spots. Was that sweat from fever or mere summer heat? Rust-colored stains? Blood from internal bleeding or just an accidental scratch? The physician's report would determine the day's events. Too concerning, and court would be cancelled. Alarmingly wrong, and succession plans might start quietly circulating. Henry VIII's doctors kept meticulous notes on his sheet inspections. When his leg ulcers worsened, the morning checks grew longer. Physicians debated whether yellowish stains indicated healing or infection. No detail was too small. They recorded how far sweat had spread across pillows, whether it smelled sour or metallic. These observations guided treatments that often made things worse, like wrapping the rotting leg in sheepskin soaked in rosewater. Some inspections had immediate consequences. When Charles II's sheets showed blackish stains in 1685, physicians recognized internal bleeding. They bled him further, worsening the crisis. His final hours saw frantic sheet changes as servants tried hiding the evidence before courtiers saw. The physician's notes that morning essentially became the king's death warrant. Bodily functions were state secrets. Queen Anne's physicians tracked her bedclothes during 17 pregnancies, searching for the hopeful pink tinge of early miscarriage versus the dangerous scarlet of hemorrhage. Her sheets told a story no ambassador dared repeat. That despite all efforts, the Stuart line was dying with her. Even the way blankets lay bunched could signal trouble. Physicians noted when Elizabeth I's bedding showed restless patterns, interpreting it as humoral imbalance. The practice reached bizarre extremes with Philip II of Spain. His priests blessed his sheets before use, then physicians inspected them alongside holy relics. Spots were compared to saintly stigmata. When the king developed gout, doctors spent hours debating whether the urine stains resembled Jerusalem on a map. Meanwhile, Philip's enemies intercepted his laundry reports, using them to estimate how long he'd live. Morning inspections weren't limited to beds. Royal chamber pots got equal scrutiny. Louis XIV's physician personally tasted his urine each day, supposedly checking for sweetness indicating diabetes. Others simply smelled it, though Charles VI's doctor preferred dipping litmus paper made from crushed violets. If it turned red, the king's humours were out of balance. Let's just say job satisfaction wasn't high in this field. Some monarchs weaponized the inspections. Elizabeth I's clean sheets became propaganda, proof of her virginal constancy. When rumours spread about her and Robert Dudley, she ordered physicians to attest publicly that her nighttime perspiration patterns proved celibacy. Meanwhile, Henry VIII allegedly had Anne Boleyn's sheets inspected for proof of affairs. Finding none, he reportedly had stains planted. The ritual created awkward hierarchies. High-ranking physicians got first look at the sheets, with assistants standing farther back. In some courts, only the lead doctor could touch the linens directly. Others had to examine from 3 feet away, close enough to see, not close enough to interfere with evidence. A French physician lost his position for folding a soiled sheet improperly, obscuring key-staining patterns. Children weren't spared. The future Louis XIII's nursery staff saved his soiled linen for physicians to review weekly. Notes mention counting wet patches to assess kidney function. When 9-year-old Edward VI fell ill, his doctors studied nightshirts for excess phosphorescence, believing royal bodies emitted special light when healthy. They saw none. Correctly predicting his tuberculosis would be fatal. Medieval medicine lent pseudo-scientific weight to the practice. Texts taught that royal bodies produced different humours than commoners. A king's sweat should smell like autumn leaves, a queen's like milk and honey. Deviations signalled divine displeasure. When Richard II's sheets smelled strangely floral before deposition, priests declared it God abandoning him. Probably just scented soap, but try telling medieval nobles that. The inspections shaped palaces physically. Versailles' royal bedchamber had special north-facing windows, not for comfort, but because physicians believed morning light showed stains more accurately. Hampton Court installed white marble floors in dressing rooms, so any dropped linens could be examined against a pure background. The awareness of constant scrutiny affected rulers psychologically. Maria Theresa of Austria admitted she'd wake imagining physicians already judging her sweat patterns before she'd even opened her eyes. Some royals pushed back. Catherine the Great replaced her morning sheet inspections with verbal reports. Everything's fine. Now leave. Her physicians protested until she pointed out they'd missed her pregnancy for 5 months while staring at linen. Elizabeth of Bohemia took it further, having identical clean sheets ready each morning to swap before inspections. Her doctor only realized when he noticed the sweat stains were always in the same artistic patterns. The system's flaws became obvious with mental illness. George III's raging fits left no physical traces on sheets, baffling physicians. They resorted to tasting his saliva, searching for bitter madness humours. When nothing explained his behaviour, they blamed imaginary sheet stains, claiming the king had tossed too vigorously to leave marks. Meanwhile, courtiers whispered the real diagnosis: porphyria, a condition no linen inspection could detect. Royal women faced special scrutiny. After childbirth, queens endured weeks of sheet checks confirming postpartum bleeding followed proper courses. Mary the Queen's doctors charted her stains like tide tables, declaring her fit to resume duties only when patterns matched their textbooks. Fertility inspections grew especially invasive. Anne Boleyn's monthly sheets were preserved for months, compared against crescent moons to predict conception chances. Ironically, the system's obsession with health often spread disease. Physicians moving between sick rooms carried infections on their inspection robes. Smallpox ravaged the Spanish court after a doctor examined Philip IV's infected son, then checked the king's sheets without changing clothes. The practice continued anyway. Protocol outweighed plague. The examinations had linguistic legacies. Medical terms like night sweats and death rattle originated from royal sheet inspections. Even the word diagnosis comes from Greek for through the sheets, a reference to ancient physicians examining Alexander the Great's bedding. Modern medicine rendered most inspections obsolete, but echoes remain. The British royal family's physicians still receive reports on sleep patterns, though now gathered by discreet sensors rather than linen scrutiny. When the late Queen Elizabeth II hospitalized, aides ensured her bed was made with specific thread count sheets, not for comfort, but because modern doctors note hydration levels from wrinkle patterns. For all its strangeness, the system reflected an unavoidable truth. A monarch's body was public property. Kings and queens didn't own their own sweat, their breath, even their waste. Everything served the state. Today we call that invasion of privacy. Back then they called it good governance. The inspections also reveal how little separated royalty from servants in vulnerability. A king might dine on gold plates, but he still bled on the same linen as a scullery maid. The physician's morning ritual was a blunt reminder. Power didn't make you immune to biology. Louis XIV might have been the Sun King by day, but at night, he perspired like any mortal. Some physicians crossed from science into superstition. The French royal doctor who claimed Charles VIII's death could have been prevented if only he'd noticed the king's sheets smelled like burnt feathers 3 mornings prior. Not all royals tolerated the constant surveillance. Some fought back, carving out hidden pockets of solitude in palaces designed to deny it. These rebels understood something modern psychology confirms. Even kings and queens need moments alone. Take Isabella of France, the so-called she-wolf. Married to Edward II of England, she endured years of humiliation as her husband favoured male courtiers over her. While most queens accepted such slights, Isabella plotted. She formed an alliance with Roger Mortimer, raised an army, and invaded England, deposing her own husband. As regent for her young son Edward III, she ruled unchained from constant observation for 3 years. Contemporary chroniclers called it scandalous. Modern eyes might call it self-preservation. Marguerite of Provence tried subtler resistance. Married to saintly Louis IX of France, she watched her influence shrink as pious advisors took control. When Louis left for crusade, she finally got breathing room as regent, only to lose it when their son Philip III sidelined her. Her solution? She built a private retreat at the Château de Vincennes with rooms no courtier could enter. The Queen's closet became legendary. Some whispered she practiced witchcraft there. More likely, she just wanted one damn room to herself. The lengths royals went for privacy bordered on absurd. Maria Theresa of Spain put on full court attire, hoops, corset, the works, then disappeared for hours. Her ladies eventually found her curled behind draperies, fully dressed, but finally alone. Philip II's daughter, Isabella Clara Eugenia, hid in palace attics to read forbidden books. When caught, she claimed she was inspecting the rafters. No one bought it, but the pretense allowed both sides to save face. Some fabricated illnesses. Anne of Austria developed migraines requiring dark, silent rooms, conveniently free of attendants. Her son Louis XIV saw through the ruse, but allowed it. Perhaps he understood. Even the Sun King occasionally sneaked out to his mistress's house, not for sex, but for uninterrupted conversation. Private words became the ultimate luxury. Children devised their own escapes. The future Ferdinand I of Austria played a clever game. He'd lose his attendance in Schönbrunn Palace's hedge mazes. His secret: memorizing every turn while his guards relied on maps. By age 12, he could vanish for whole afternoons. The tutors eventually caught on, but not before he'd logged hundreds of solitary hours among the topiaries. Architectural tricks helped. Marie Antoinette's Hameau at Versailles looked like a quaint village, but its thatched cottages contained private suites with hidden doors. She'd retire there with close friends, excluding even her ladies-in-waiting. When criticized, she claimed she was studying rural life. The court rolled its eyes but couldn't stop her. The Queen's whims were law, even when transparently false. Other women used religion. Eleanor of Castile built private chapels where she could pray alone, or so she said. In reality, she read secular books smuggled in as devotional texts. Her husband Edward I knew, but pretended not to. Their unspoken deal. Piety covered a multitude of private sins. The riskiest rebellions involved disguises. Christina of Sweden famously roamed Stockholm dressed as a man, avoiding recognition in plain sight. Less known are the dozens of royal children who did the same. Henry VIII's younger brother, Edmund, reportedly sneaked into taverns wearing his tutor's clothes. His punishment, more tutors. Sleep became the last frontier of privacy, when royals could get it. Queen Victoria's journals described treasured nights when Albert was away and she could sleep diagonally across the bed. No delegated half, no attendants fussing, just a middle-aged woman enjoying her mattress in peace. Historians often dismiss these entries as trivial. Anyone who's shared a bed understands their importance. The medical establishment enabled some privacy seekers. When Elizabeth of Bohemia pleaded female troubles to avoid ceremonies, her doctors backed the ruse. Never mind that her condition flared up predictably during ambassador visits. As long as physicians certified her illness, protocol allowed the absence. Half the Habsburg women allegedly had similar mysterious ailments. But rebellion had limits. When Friedrich Wilhelm Mauer of Prussia caught his daughter sneaking books into chapel, he burned them publicly. When Catherine the Great's son Paul I found servant tunnels used for private liaisons, he had them bricked up. The message was clear. Your body belongs to the state, even in rebellion. The most tragic cases couldn't escape at all. Mary Queen of Scots endured near-constant monitoring during her English captivity. Her jailers logged every menstrual cycle, noting potential pregnancies. Her letters were copied before delivery. Still, she found tiny victories, using lemon juice as invisible ink, developing a cipher for trusted letters. When Elizabeth I's spies broke the code, Mary simply invented another. The cat-and-mouse game continued for 18 years. Male rulers faced different pressures. Charles V of England built private art galleries where he could admire his collection alone. His subjects called it eccentric. Modern psychologists might recognize a man desperate for control in a life that allowed none. His eventual execution made the galleries moot, but while they stood, they were his only truly personal spaces. Some withdrew emotionally when physical escape failed. Philip II of Spain became famously taciturn, speaking only when necessary. Courtiers assumed it was piety. Likely it was self-defense. If you never talk, no one can twist your words. His daughter Isabella matched his silence, earning the nickname the Marble Queen. What looked like dignity may have just been exhaustion. The most effective rebels changed systems from within. Empress Maria Theresa overhauled Habsburg court protocols, eliminating the most intrusive bedroom rituals. She kept the public dressing ceremonies but banned physicians from routine sheet inspections. When aides protested, she reportedly said, "If I die, you'll know soon enough." A practical woman. Victoria's withdrawal after Albert's death became its own rebellion, a widow rejecting public life for years. Critics called it dereliction of duty. Supporters saw a grieving woman finally setting boundaries. The truth? Probably both. Even empresses get to be human sometimes. The common thread? Every rebel paid a price. Isabella of France was overthrown by her own son. Christina of Sweden had to abdicate. Marie Antoinette's private retreats fueled, "Let them eat cake" myths. And yet, they kept trying, because living without privacy isn't living. It's performing. Modern psychology confirms what these royals knew instinctively. Solitude isn't selfish, it's necessary for mental health. Studies show even brief alone time reduces stress, boosts creativity, and improves emotional regulation. Monarchs deprived of it suffered accordingly. George III's famous madness may have been exacerbated by relentless public exposure. His physicians noted he grew agitated after long ceremonies, not during them. The breaking point came after, in the uneasy silence when the mask could finally drop. We see similar patterns today. Celebrities who crack under constant scrutiny. Politicians whose private outbursts reveal the strain of perpetual performance. The difference? Royals couldn't quit. Abdication meant disgrace, often death. So they found workarounds, some healthy, some not. Victoria took up journaling. Frederick the Great played flute concertos alone at night. Maria Theresa gardened in secluded palace corners. Small acts of defiance against systems designed to crush individuality. The irony: today we envy royal luxury while forgetting its costs. That gilded palace wasn't a home, it was a gilded cage. Those servants weren't help, they were spies. And the crown that glittered so brightly? It never came off, not truly. So next time you cherish a quiet coffee alone, spare a thought for these rebels. Their struggles remind us, privacy isn't just nice, it's necessary. Even, no, especially, for those who seem to have everything. Now let's talk about the ultimate luxury we have that kings lacked. Hot baths without an audience, meals without tasters, and beds no one inspects but you. But that's a modern privilege we'll explore next time. For now, consider this. What's your version of hiding in the palace attic? A long shower, a solo walk. We all need those moments. Even if, unlike Maria Theresa, we don't have to pretend we're inspecting rafters. Let me know in the comments how you carve out privacy in your life. And remember, liking this video is the modern equivalent of handing the Queen her chemise. Wait, that sounded better in my head. Just, you know what to do. Because here's the truth those royals understood. Without private moments, we're just actors in someone else's play. And unlike them, we can usually choose when the curtains close. But that's the final insight we'll save for the conclusion. For now, let's just say, enjoy your alone time while you have it. Kings and queens would have killed for that luxury. Sometimes literally. Tonight, take a moment before turning out the lights. No guards will inspect your sheets, no courtiers will witness your bedtime, and no physicians will analyze your pajamas. The solitude you take for granted was unimaginable luxury for kings and queens. Think about Isabella of France hiding in closets, Victoria stretching across her bed, or Maria Theresa faking migraines just to be alone. Your private moments, scrolling in silence, eating without tasters, closing the bathroom door, were their wildest dreams. So when you curl up tonight, remember, that boring, peaceful privacy, it's what royals would have sacrificed everything for. Sleep well, and alone.